Kallan followed the recurring foot through the endless blue and sickly silver corridor. She wandered in dreaming. For hours she had looked for the corridor's end. Twice she had doubled back in search of the beginning, but there was only ever the endless hall without windows or doors, filled with the echoing thwit. The echo continued, sustaining its tempo, while a young girl sang, "Through the wind the spriggans play, o'er the sea where they stay." Kallan ignored the child's song and ran toward the thwit at the end of the hall. A brief rush of wind grazed her legs, urging her on ahead toward the wind, the thwit, and the end. The fairy queen, she sits there still, tending the earth beneath her hill. Kallan followed the song around another corridor and began the next corridor. Shadows billowed in the distance, rolling in on themselves, concealing the end or another corridor. And still the child sang, "Where the mystical fae kings throng, fills the earth with ancient song." The rhythm of the thwit was wrong, too consistent for it to be random, and repeated itself too frequently to be an arrow. She tried to stir, to open her eyes, but sleep was too deep, her dreams too real. She could not wake. "Where the fae kings' halls are called, where they sing their songs of old." Foreign smells invaded her senses, and she tried to find the familiar scent of sweet rose and lavender that always filled her room and mingled with the sea air. Her hand brushed her gown. Kallan moved her fingers against the soft furs on her bed and the silks brought from the east, but touched cold dew instead. Another breeze grazed her leg. The song was growing louder. "Through the wind the spriggans play, o'er the sea where they stay." Through the shadows the dark one's black eyes gleamed. Kallan opened her mouth to cry out, to scream, but sage flame came instead, engulfing the corridor and drowning out the song that turned to screams. The soft mist of Leafspan's falls fell into the fire that burned the water, and Kallan glimpsed Dagon's face in the dark. The screaming continued, and Kallan called for the children, but shadows stretched through an icy black. There the seethe seemed to end, and the screaming stopped. With a gasp, Kallan woke to the darkness and the bit of orange light from a small campfire. Her shoulders screamed with pain at having her arms pulled behind her and around a tree, forcing her back to arch into the trunk. But the cold metal of her blade pressed against the flesh of her throat, robbed her of all concerns. At the end of the blade, inches from her face, Rune stared. "Good evening," he said. Kallan tugged at her bound wrists, adding to the fire in her joints, while the bark of the tree grated the entire length of her back through her chemise. She assessed her bonds with her fingers. "You and I need to have a talk, princess." Kallan clenched her teeth at the name, and he grinned. The firelight danced across his face, making him appear strikingly similar to the dark one in the night shadow. "That's right. You don't like princess, do you?" "Untie me," Kallan said. Not until we have an understanding." Kallan summoned a bit of flame from the tip of her finger and proceeded to singe the rope. "Keep him talking." "What do you want?" "You have no reason to trust me," Rune said. "I have no reason to trust you. Ergo, I have no reason not to slit your throat and leave you dead and tied to this tree." "He's serious." "You have a point," she said. "Burn faster. Now let's assume, as one possible option, that I don't kill you right here and drag your body back to Gunir as a spoil of war." Kallan crunched her face into a fake smile. "Instead, I extend my hand in truce and offer you, call it a choice. A choice. Let's assume I lower this blade and untie you," Rune said. "You then can kill me with that scythe of yours." "Sounds good to me." Daylight flashed in her eyes, and she watched his attention shift to other matters for that moment. "Or you can make a choice," Rune said. "Keep him talking." "I'm listening." "Let's say you hear what I have to say, return to Gunir as my prisoner, my guest," he corrected. "We'll sit down and negotiate peace between our people, perhaps declare a holiday in our name, and we'll all go home and forget this little misunderstanding." A coal in the fire popped. "Misunderstanding." Her binds were weakening. "Or I can kill you now," he said. "There is no misunderstanding," she said. Rune narrowed his gaze. "I've sent out hundreds of messages to your city requesting peace, imploring you to meet with me on civil ground." "Why do you lie?" She twisted a wrist. "You have traitors in your city, fair princess." The smell of burning hemp reached her nose. Tension dissolved Rune's confidence, and Kallan pulled her wrists free, firing as she brought them around. Still clutching her knife, Rune jumped back and around the tree, missing Kallan's scythe just in time. Kallan rebounded, firing a blast that singed the trunk, and Rune ran toward Astrid, who stood on the bank of a stream. "Kallan!" She fired a blast at Rune's feet. "If you would just hear me out!" She fired a second blast, striking the ground ahead of him and steering him away from her horse. "We look for peace!" he cried. "Peace! she shrieked, and fired the ground again. "Come to Gunir! You take me for a fool?" Kallan said. "You think I would trust you? I go to Gunir and I go to my death! The Dark One would personally cut my ribs through my back! Bergwin, I've seen the horrors he unleashed on my people!" Kallan cried. "The horrors you and your father ordered! The orphans he left behind!" Rune furrowed his brow. The massacre of Ostade erupted from both palms as Kallan fired her flames into Rune. Under the energy, he arched his back and screamed. Within, the shadow erupted. In the abyss, the darkness thrashed. In the depths of under-earth, far beyond the falls of light, beneath the lakes of seed, there the darkness waited. Writhing, it twisted and took shape until, like a dragon awakened, it rose, the black beast. On the sidelines given by Eric, the beast found its way into Rune, where it devoured Kallan's scythe, feasting on it, drawing it into Rune's body. There the beast ate of it, and unscathed drank of the scythe, while Rune buckled beneath Kallan's fire as it passed into him, trailing down his own threads of life. There in its belly the beast hoarded the energy, holding on to it and storing it, preserving it until the right time when the scythe would be called upon again. All at once the fire stopped, and Rune fell to his knees panting. His hands shook, his body quaked, and Rune gasped wide-eyed. Energy surged through him, igniting a strength that felt like it would shred his body with want to break free. He clasped his hands, but the shaking persisted. From the ground he raised his eyes and met Kallan's across the clearing. The lone campfire did well to reflect the horror in her gaze. Before he had a chance to breathe, she struck again. And again the beast drank of its share. Again the scythe flame flowed. Throwing back his head, Rune roared as he poured her scythe into him. His body twitched, and just as he was certain his chest would implode, she broke the line. This time, Rune sustained his balance. He drew up his knee, and the Sedkona took a pace back. She fired again. The beast drank, but Rune held his ground. Her streams were growing fainter. Her endurance weakened. Rune moved toward Kallan, who stepped back and fired again, sending his body into another set of tremors. This time, when she broke the line, he remained upright, gasping for breath, but with far more strength than before. As if his body had been jolted awake, he bounced on his heels, eager to run, eager to fight. Blood roared through his body. He saw the Sedkona, the small, feeble princess rendered powerless, and he grinned. Kallan stepped back. Rune mirrored her footwork. She retreated 2 more steps, and he delighted at the nervous shift of her eyes. No sword, no dagger, no scythe. Just claws. He widened his grin. "I can handle claws!" Kallan retreated. Rune lunged, and she ran into the forest. Kallan kicked up the leaf litter as she tore through the wood. The wind stirred like death's cold breath. A chill pricked Kallan's flesh, and all at once the wind stilled. Darkness enclosed the forest like a black pool of bottomless water. The whispers within the shadows returned. They were there, watching, waiting as they had for weeks now. Stripped of all weapons, and without a way to outrun them, Kallan summoned her scythe. Flame swallowed her hands, spreading up her arms as the shadows grew colder, and devoured the forest around her. And Kallan relinquished her flame into the darkness. A path of embers climbed the leaves and branches. The rush of adrenaline sharpened her senses, not knowing if she would attack again or run. She studied the umbra for the things that drained the life from the wood. "Kallan!" Rune called from behind. He emerged from the brush. "Call them off!" she said, already amassing another round of scythe that snaked up her arms like sleeves. Rune looked from Kallan's scythe to the umbra. "They are not my men," he said. "I have no reason to believe you," she said, eyeing her dagger gripped in his hand. The dream was clear, and I am a fool for ignoring the signs, she thought. "I'm going back!" "You can't go back." Rune flexed his grip on the hilt. "You don't know what goes on there." The gentle note in his tone only augmented her rage. With a matching flick of both wrists, Kallan expelled the scythe through the wind, and Rune stood enduring the scythe, taking it in as he had before. As she poured her scythe into his chest, as he took it in until he teetered from the rush she knew it gave him, Kallan approached him and snatched the hilt, but his guard had not been so low. As she moved to take the dagger, he grabbed her and spun her about, pinning her to his chest, her blade pressed to her throat. Kallan inhaled against the prick upon her tender flesh. "Why the sudden interest in peace?" she asked, not daring to turn against the poised tip of the blade. "Gunir has always, ever sought peace," Rune said. Kallan threw back her head into Rune's face. He stumbled back as blood poured from his nose. "I don't believe you!" she replied, and released a blaze that rent the air, launching Rune across the forest floor. The force slammed him into the tree with a crack, while his body took in the scythe and fire. She broke the stream and made her way across the clearing as he lay panting. "If I wanted this war, I would have killed you while you slept," Rune said. A stream of Saith roared from her hands. Like before, Rune buckled under the impact as it flowed into him until she disrupted the stream. "I would have left you at the stables!" he shouted. Sprinting, Kallan fired a blast to his chest. Rune's back arched against the Saith as if his body devoured the surge, taking in all that she gave him. She broke the connection, and he fell forward, catching himself on his palms. "I would have left you to the shadow!" Rune gasped as Kallan recharged her next attack. Welcoming the rage that had taken her, she sent a discharge and another, not caring where her Saith landed. Each discharge Rune met and drew in. When the Saith missed it, it curved into him as if pulled by something inside of him. If only he would die, then maybe she could forget. She marched across the forest, and Rune stood, his full focus clearly on the Sidkona. The next run of Saith pooled in her hand. Kallan pulled back her arm and blazoned with flame. When Rune's hand flew to her wrist hard enough to startle her, he wasn't weak. If anything, he was stronger, too strong. "I would have killed you as you lay dying in Svandal!" Rune's words held Kallan in place. "You were there," she whispered, her palm still surging with Saith. "Free to impale you with my sword while you lay dying," he said. "My father—" Anger held the word in her throat. Kallan condensed the Saith into her palm, amassing the strength to a smaller surface. "I never gave that order," he said between breaths. Kallan narrowed her eyes, weighing his word for truth. "Why should I believe you?" she asked, not yet ready to surrender her Saith. "Because," he said, "I wouldn't have killed a king to spare his daughter, who, I might add, has proven to be more of a pain in my ass than her predecessor." Kallan relaxed her grip, quelling the Saith that had pooled. "I swear to you, Kallan," Rune said, "I am not your enemy." Silence engulfed the forest. Within the quiet, the shadows closed in. "We need to leave," Rune said. The darkness swelled. "Now!" Rune grasped her hand and turned from the shadows, but his feet never left the ground. A whirlwind of black engulfed him, propelling Rune through the trees. Whether it was branches or bones that Kallan heard crack, she couldn't tell. Expanding her lunge, she opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came. The shadow drove down her throat and into her belly. Something hard struck the back of her head, and she fell into a pool of her own blood. As the world faded black, the pendant slipped from her fingers, and Kallan lost herself to the darkness.